Hello, everyone. Hello. Testing. Let me know if you can hear me. I hope so. Looks like it's just going to be me today because there was. All right, good. Thank you, Bad Cookie. So a little bit of a strange tech issues going on today. What's up, Jacqueline and Rondo? Always good to see you guys. So I don't know if anyone's heard, but StreamYard was down for a few hours there. At least I only tried to set up the show a couple hours ago, and we couldn't actually get on the StreamYard. And I thought, this is weird. So I asked Abby, could you set up the stream? And then she's like, it's saying no healthy upstream. It was giving this no healthy upstream error message to everyone. So then I was already experiencing some computer strangeness this week because I reinstalled my Windows on my computer because, as you guys know, I've been having computer difficulties for quite some time now. So trying to figure out what I can do to actually improve the situation. So I think that was the right thing to do, to reinstall Windows, but I lost a whole bunch of my programs and stuff, like the browser I usually use for StreamYard. So I thought that maybe that's why it wasn't working. But turns out that's not really what it was about. So anyway, I digress a little bit here. We are live. We managed to make it here. Abby went out to the grocery store after learning that StreamYard was down and thinking that, well, it looks like we're not going to be able to do our show. She just decided to make use of her time constructively, which is exactly the right thing to do. But we'll see if maybe when she gets back, she can try and hop on or not. Who knows? But I thought it was probably okay for me to do a solo stream this week because of the nature of the topic, which we can get to here now. I named the stream Zionist Midwifery of the Hague. A little bit of a how should I phrase this? Little bit of a bold assertion, right? To be associating Zionism with the Hague. The International Court of Arbitration is more what I'm talking about, and not necessarily the city. Although, as we'll look into this topic, we'll see that the Hague and Amsterdam in the Netherlands has been a kind of a very integral part of the Jewish community and diaspora, and kind of a key to their success. And we'll kind of get into why. So I see Cookies saying, you don't look like the Microsoft Edge kind of guy, Michael. I'm going to make the bold assumption your browser of choice is Firefox. It used to be for quite a while. I was using Firefox, and you're right. I'm not really Microsoft Edge, but that's what I'm using right now, just because I had everything cleared off, and then I kind of got to consult with my dad about my antivirus program because he had paid for the prescription or subscription fee, and I don't know. I probably still have it, but I think he needs to maybe set it up again because it's in his billing information. So until then, I'm just going to use the Microsoft Edge. But it's kind of interesting to see the differences. I'm learning a lot with how the internet, like tech stuff, works a little bit, but kind of slowly because I don't exactly have anyone to teach me. So it's kind of trial and error. So yeah, Rondo, deep dive into Ziontology methodology. I hope that I can do this topic justice. It's going to be kind of a challenge to not just kind of come across as anti-Semitic, and you know, uh, the whole conflation with anti-Zionists and anti-Semitism is a little bit of a tripwire that we all have to kind of learn how to navigate. And so let's try and get to some of this content before I just kind of waste a whole bunch of time chit-chatting. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. One of the things that was kind of tipping me to look into this direction was some of the stuff that came out in the news cycle last week. This article's from Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025, but it's June 12th today. So yeah, last week the Dutch government collapsed as Wilder, is it Wilder or Wilder? Vile guy, kind of the way to put it anyway. So, but Wilder's far-right party leaves coalition. And so the far-right Party for Freedom is leaving the Netherlands government over its policy for asylum seekers. So basically, the coalition was not racist enough for them in their treatment of immigrants and asylum seekers here. And so they decided that they needed the leader, Geert Wilders, said on Tuesday that they had to topple the governing coalition. So I signed up for the strictest asylum policy, not for the downfall of the Netherlands, Wilders told reporters Tuesday morning. And our responsibility for this cabinet, therefore, ends here. Wilder's decision to withdraw support for the most right-leaning government in Dutch history has plunged the country's politics into chaos, leaves the government led by Prime Minister Dick Schoof with just 51 out of 150 seats in parliament. So we can just leave that story there for the moment. That just kind of sets the table a little bit for the topic today. In the chaos going on in the Netherlands currently might be more easily understood if we look back at the history of the Netherlands and why it is the way it is today. So my accusation that there's a whole lot of Zionism involved with the foundation of the International Court of Arbitration was going to kind of come across as a little bit like ludicrous or irrational if people steeped in the propaganda of today, like seeing what's in the news cycle there about like the far right being in control of Dutch politics, and it's like the anti-Semitic Nazi far right kind of people. You have to look into you have to keep looking into like the big picture, keep investigating all of this stuff, and then the more you do that, the more you kind of get a genuine understanding of how things are working. Because this far right Geert Wilders Freedom Party is a pro-Israel party, and it's one of those things to kind of wrap your head around. So as far as the whole Nazis and Zionists working together these days, that's something that without doing the research, it's a kind of claim that sounds ridiculous, but there is actual substance to the argument. So before I move on, the next thing to talk about after that is kind of I think the the farce that was the Nuremberg trials just briefly, because a lot of people kind of assumed that justice prevailed. And so when I'm talking about Zionist influence over the foundation of these international courts of arbitration and stuff, you'd think that after the Holocaust that they would want to be ensuring that justice properly prevailed, that the people responsible for the Holocaust were properly brought to justice. But then as far as complicity of Zionists with Nazis, that's kind of a circumstantial evidence, I would say, that there was a little bit more cooperation going on behind the scenes than was understood at the time and even now. And because it's a kind of like third rail topic, that makes it difficult for people to talk about without being treated like some kind of Nazi sympathizer or something, because they talk about the Holocaust and stuff in a way that's not in exactly excessively reverent to the established narrative, right? Because that's kind of that's the wheelhouse of the neo-Nazis these days, is like Holocaust denial and stuff. And it makes it very difficult to kind of critique or reassess any of the Holocaust narratives without being lumped in with the Nazis. And that is, I think, definitely by design, trying to make this part of history. As much as they beat us over the head with it in school, trying to drill into our head that it was the worst thing that ever happened in human history, now we're not allowed to talk about it. So that's the kind of things that's just frustrating. So, but let me just get to this article here so that I don't sound like I'm just coming across like somebody doesn't know what the fuck I'm talking about. So today marks the 74th anniversary of the sentencing at the main Nuremberg trials. This article came out in 2019. So in 2019 was the 74th anniversary. The Nuremberg trials were never really meant to serve justice. In one way, I can understand it, but on the other hand, looking at the sentences handed out, one cannot escape the fact that it was really a window dressing exercise. Of the 24 defendants, the International Tribunal found all but 3 of the defendants guilty. 12 were sentenced to death, 1 in absentia, Martin Bormann, and the rest were given prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life behind bars. The fact that 3 of them got acquitted speaks volumes. Each one of those 24 men were involved in horrendous war crimes and genocide in one way or another, be it in actively participating or by facilitating. No one should have walked out of that court a free man. Those who did not get the death sentence were given very lenient sentences. And 24 defendants does not seem like nearly enough to be tried for this kind of a crime. I think it should have been thousands of people that were tried for this. So just off the top of my head. But those Albert Speer was pivotal in the Nazi crimes, but he was very manipulative. His lies were believed, and he was sentenced to 20 years. After his release, he lived a wealthy life, mainly from proceeds of stolen art. Because the accused men and judges spoke 4 different languages, the trial saw the introduction of a technological innovation taken for granted today: instantaneous translation. IBM provided the technology and recruited men and women from international telephone exchanges to provide on-the-spot translations through headphones in English, French, German, and Russian. Strangely enough, not one staff member of IBM were in the docks with the defendants. IBM played a crucial role in the Holocaust at all 6 phases: identification, expulsion from society, confiscation, ghettoization, deportation, and even extermination. Moreover, recently discovered documents portray with crystal clarity the personal involvement and micromanagement of IBM President Thomas Watson in the company's co-planning and co-organizing of Hitler's campaign to destroy the Jews. There were subsequent trials, but if you look at the amount of sentences, it is absolutely shocking how so many got away with murder. Many of them got high positions in government bodies in Germany and the USSR, USA, and the UK. And that line right there kind of led me into a little bit of a undiscovered part of history, that many of them got high positions in government bodies in the USSR. That was something that I didn't really actually know until I read this article. Everyone knows about Operation Paperclip, but I forget now what the Russian operation was. before I had reset my computer, I had started my research on this project, and then I reset my Windows and I lost all of my bookmarks from my previous browser. So, but maybe one day we'll go looking into that topic. It's actually kind of fascinating. So as far as people kind of trying to lionize the USSR a little excessively over the USA at this time, one of the things that we usually hold over their heads is that, well, you guys took Nazi war criminals into your science and engineering programs for your Cold War race or whatever. How awful of you. It's like, okay, but if the Soviets did the same, it kind of like makes, as a communist, it makes me angry. It makes it difficult for me to, in the, like, after everything now that's has happened after the collapse of the USSR, to defend kind of these sorts of things that they've done in the name of pragmatism, right? So as far as people saying, "Oh, you got a purity fetish," whatever, this is the kind of stuff where you just kind of lose coherence with your arguments when you're trying to stretch like pragmatism so far as to justify allowing people off of war crimes, while you actively, a lot of streamers these days and stuff, actively go around crying very hard about how we need to hold these people accountable for war crimes, right? So be careful not to make yourself a hypocrite. That's kind of all I'm trying to say there. I'm not trying to jump on anybody, but we gotta, not to have a purity fetish, but being a hypocrite is an idiotic thing to do. It's not going to help anyone's movements, right? So kind of getting a little bit sidetracked here. So I'm trying to remember here what I was going to go. Another thing to mention about the USSR is, in connection with the Nuremberg trials, is another thing that I learned in this investigation is that Russia was the first to try Nazi war criminals from Germany before the Nuremberg trials ever happened. They had trials in the city of Kharkiv, and they tried a lot more than, I forget the number now. I don't really want to throw out random numbers, but at least hundreds of people were put to death, as opposed to, like, whatever, what was it, 12 that they said, you know? So 12 were sentenced to death by what turned into NATO, right? But in Russia, at the time, the Soviet Union, just as they are now today with Ukrainian, like, captured prisoner of war, they're going to actively hold these war criminals to account, whether you agree with that or not. So let's move on a bit here. You try and figure out where to jump to next. That would be most appropriate. Just bear with me here for a moment. So, I'm not sure. There's just, this was a huge topic for me, so it's probably worth revisiting and stuff, because there's and maybe it's just the way that my brain works. I get kind of have a hard time processing everything, and I kind of get on too many tracks of thought without properly finishing the work, right? I got to be a little bit more diligent and completionist, I guess. So I guess there's something else to talk about before we get too involved in the historical stuff. There's been a lot of stuff in the news about this Greta Thunberg with the Freedom Flotilla, and I've been a little bit cynical about what I've been seeing, and I see a lot of people wanting to get behind that sort of thing. Oh, I'm seeing my browser has lost connection. And try sharing your screen again. Do I have any problems? Everything working over here? So let me see what the chat's going on. Sorry to neglect you guys. So, oof, it's a horrible name. Dick Schoof. Yuck. Yeah. I consider, even though I got the name Johnson, which is, like having the Dick for a last name, but at least it's not as bad as there are some others out there. Yeah, apparently Do Dissidents went down as well because of tech issues. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. I guess we'll find out in the coming days. But I'm a little surprised to see a lot of people still managing to stream. So, okay, thanks, Rondo. Good on my end. Cool. It's just one of those streams where I gotta be making sure that I'm not like talking to myself for a half an hour, because I've seen that happen a few times. So, Jackson says you can't really have a Freedom UK party because the acronym would never work. LOL. Yeah. Well, that's we got to talk about what's going on with the UK politics these days. I got to kind of figure out what's happening with Nigel Farage's party, Reform UK, because that's what they're kind of trying to be like a Freedom UK party, but yeah, they can't really, for whatever reason, they can't portray themselves like that, unlike other countries. So I think it's just too much on the nose. Like the British Empire that controlled a quarter of the world, going to be Freedom UK anything. Like just don't ever talk about freedom again. You know, like get rid of your monarch before you ever talk about freedom. That's one thing I have no patience with the British for. You know, like even though I'm English and Finnish, you know, I can't respect myself as an Englishman knowing that there's such a devotion to monarchy. I don't understand what that is. That doesn't help the average person. So Ziontologists are incredibly litigious, so it stands to reason. Yeah, well, that's where it's all about like democracy and human rights and everything. This is one of the things that I'm trying to well, I'm going to try and get to talk about this Freedom Flotilla, but I'm going to look at the comments first so I don't just ignore you guys. So Jacqueline was saying she has a nasty feeling that the Reform Party in the UK would probably be politically aligned with the Dems. I get the impression that they would be like the People's Party of the USA. I'm not really sure if that's accurate, though. But I bet you the three that saw no punishment, rich elites of the Nazi Party. Yeah, we should maybe look into that one day. Only 24 defendants in the Nuremberg trials. That sounds like a really small number, considering how many millions of people were unalive. Right. So this is where I'm saying, and how it's all about like the Jews who died in the Holocaust. We have to make sure that it never happens again for them and stuff. And then, but then they never really held them accountable, the ones who did it. But then I guess they would argue that that was not like their decision. It was the courts of the Europeans, right? And so that's why we kind of got to look into, okay, who's the power behind the thrones here, right? So, and yeah, that's where I felt I wanted to share that article because about the IBM bit. It's one of the things that really gives it away. So, but then it's important when you do this research that it's the Nazi thing is to blame the Jews for everything, right? And then when you look into the research, you find that there are a lot of wealthy Jewish philanthropists, businessmen behind a lot of everything, Zionists, right? But then they're always working with a group of non-Jewish people that are just like them, right? Their Protestant counterpart or their Hindu counterpart, right? So we have to keep that in context so that we don't kind of get pulled to the right subconsciously. So this sort of reminds me of the time in England where people who could read could basically get away with really heinous crimes like murder by pleading benefit of clergy. Yeah, what struck me in all this research is how much like a lot of bad stuff was happening because people didn't know how to read and they got their truth from the church or something like that, and like the priests and stuff were the ones who knew how to read and telling them all this kind of anti-Semitic bullshit. And then are you going to go blame the peasants for the people who miseducated them, right? I get like at the same time, like people should got to be smart and try and see through bullshit. Don't let yourself be gaslit, even if you're a peasant from the 14th century. Who was kind of a wasted comment because I can't talk to them anymore, but you know what I'm saying. That historical connection is the one reason why I really don't like using Windows, said Rondo. Yeah, okay, I agree, because I hate using Windows, but I can't afford the new stuff, and this is what I learned how to use, so I need to learning curves always, right? So looks like I lost my ability to share the comments on the screen. I don't know if they're popping up or not, but when I click on stuff, it's not coming up. So I think we got to just try and get this stream out the way, because I'm not sure how long it's going to last. It seems like StreamYard's back for now, but who knows if it's going to drop out. So I see you, Lance Ripa. Glad to see you joining the stream. I tried to share your comments, and I can't put them up unless they're popping up, and I can't see that. So. Oop, sorry guys. Can you hear me now? Just dropped out there. Maybe it was for the best that I dropped out. Hopefully that'll fix whatever glitch. But considering I don't know if you heard, I was just saying, I might not sure how long this stream might last, and then it goes and drops out on me. So let's try and get this one done before you lose me. So I wanted to make some comments about this because I tried to look into who's like funding this Freedom Flotilla, and I see it's basically social democrats, progressives. Okay, so when you're hearing a lot of socialists and anarchists or leftists, right, trying to play up that we should be supporting this kind of like how brave she is, it's a big whole distraction. If you learn your history, if you're a Marxist Leninist, you would understand that they will often, like, they have a big bad thing against social democrats for good reason, because historically they were kind of the foot held down on the brake, preventing revolution from actually getting anywhere. So they kind of had to be, we can't work with them anymore. And this is where people get a lot not understanding communism. They look into they get started looking into it, and then they see there's a lot of splits and tensions between all these different socialist groups, and all they seem to do is fight each other. And so how can that be about uniting and like improving the lives of everyone when all they ever do is bicker and hate each other? But then if you're trying to take it all seriously and understand what's going on, there are reasons for these splits, and you have to do your best to understand objectively who is right and who is wrong historically, and you got to do all your work to prove your case and everything. But I tend to agree that a lot of these social democrats, in their rhetoric and their tactics, have demonstrated over and over and over and over again that they are trying not to really do what's needed to achieve revolution, and they're kind of trying to act like they're the expert, they're the ones who need to be heard, who need to be followed. And it's very frustrating for people who are a little bit trying to be more of a hardline, like radical socialist communist, instead of feeling like we gotta make concessions to the capitalists because like we're gonna come across as too scary and tough or whatever. So I think that we've seen like the Democratic Party's consistent failure has been it's wanting to appeal to the right by not coming across as too hardcore left. And so they kind of assist the ratchet effect by just pulling the Democrat Party farther and farther to the right. And then the electorate sees, why would I vote for a right-wing Democrat when I could get true, actual right-wing policy from Republicans, right? So it's, but about this, what I've got in front of you, this DM25, that is Democracy in Europe Movement 25. This is Yanis Varoufakis's thing. And I don't really trust him, okay, based on him being a member of the Greek government during that whole austerity crisis that they had, and made a lot of promises, but it ended up kind of screwing everybody over and just making everything worse. But they had a lot of good sounding words that they said, and they have a lot of media coverage. They have a lot of money backing them. So it's like people always seem to think that they're the stronger way to go. and they're forgetting, like, just because they have all the backing and the money or whatever, that's not exactly, that's something to be suspicious about. It's not something to like, use as a heuristic to say that they're better than others. And so the social democrats are kind of, and the progressives, I'm sort of seeing, are two sides of the same coin. And when we want to get into what is a progressive, because, well, this is Progressive International is another funder, but I wanted to talk about the definition of progressivism real briefly, because it's a kind of word that's masking what it's really about. It's ultimately the capitalism with a clean face philosophy, but it comes across as, they don't really use the word, they don't mention capitalism very often anymore. They just kind of try to come across as socialists, right? So they just say, we're God damn it. I wonder how long I was talking to myself there, whatever. Probably not too long, but sorry, guys. Having a bad connection. I got too many things, tabs open again. I thought it would work a little bit better here, but unless I stream, I can't really know how well it's going to go. So it's going to be one of those streams. So Jacqueline was saying, what do you think of the land flotilla that's coming through Libya and Egypt? I think it's the same thing, whatever. It's these progressives, like they're the wolf in sheep's clothing. I see I got some rough connection, so I hope that I'm getting through to you without any too much glitching. But if you watch Blue Moon Red Wine, she did an excellent breakdown of like why Egypt isn't necessarily the bad guy here. They're the ones doing the most to help the Gazans, and then they're trying to put this protest movement right through Libya and Egypt. And so that I was going to read briefly the Wikipedia, just the basic definition that you can get on Wikipedia about progressivism, and then people can debate that all day they like, right? But it says right on Wikipedia that it's like a capitalist. Let me just see real brief. They want more of a check and balance on corporate monopolies, right? So they're in modern political discourse, progressivism is often associated with social liberalism, a left-leaning type of liberalism and social democracy. Within economic progressivism, there is some ideological variety on the social liberal to social democrat continuum, as well as occasionally some variance on cultural issues. Examples of this include some Christian Democrat and conservative-leaning communitarian movements. While many ideologies can fall under the banner of progressivism, both the current and historical movement are characterized by a critique of unregulated capitalism, desiring a more active democratic government to take a role in safeguarding human rights, bring about cultural development, and being a check and balance on corporate monopolies. So they're not about getting rid of corporations. They're not about getting rid of capitalism. They're about regulating capitalism. So that's where for me, it's a hard no. I am no progressive. I'm no social democrat. And I thought it's kind of important for actually us on this channel to talk about that. It's where it's a bit of a shame that Abby's not here to discuss this little bit, but if she's watching later, she'll be able to chime in on it next time. When we were kicked off of RBN, we were accused of being social democrats. And we're missing Mastermind Hour too. I'm sure I would like to hear what he would have to say about being called a social democrat, right? So this is, I kind of have to, for the record, set it straight, whatever. Don't call me that, right? Because that's bullshit. That's not what I'm about. And maybe I'm not as involved, well known as other people. I was trying to get to be known and get involved with this kind of stuff. But I want to be getting involved with the right people. I don't want to get tricked into working for the wrong people. And this is what I think has happened to a lot of people who want to get interested in this kind of politics. We all want to do the right thing, We want to try and get to work as soon as possible. We don't want to like just waste time and pretend to be who we are. And what actually ends up happening is we accidentally get involved with the wrong organization who's all about fucking grifting people and bullshitting their supporters into a dead end. And it's not by accident. And maybe I'm a little too paranoid about that, but I think it's been very an effective strategy for me to be a little bit more cautious about which parties I jump into bed with right away, because I kind of see like where they go wrong. But that being said, I'm still on the sidelines. Being a homeless leftist is not really what you want to be forever. Like, I understand there's a lot of us out there. Let's find a home, okay? So, what's up, Kitty? Good to see you, Sean. Yeah, I find some of their content not that, like, I would find it strange for me to be like, they've been in the game a lot longer, and then for like someone like me and Abby to be kind of getting a little bit more like better analysis than them on some things would be shocking to me. But then I don't see them. I think they're a little bit too busy with being so successful. It kind of makes it hard to, you kind of get led down some of the wrong rabbit holes and stuff. And so, but I can't be too simping for them too much, right? Like, I'm not really, I tried to warn Nick Cruz about getting too close with these Midwestern Marks guys right now, and because they're Midwestern Marks too can be pretty trash right now about some stuff. But we're all growing. We're all in a moment. Everything is pretty hectic right now. So hopefully we can all kind of not give up on each other and not try and destroy each other because of stupid streamer bullshit, right? So, and that's one of the things that's bullshit. If you're getting banned on all the accounts that you're calling them out on, that's the kind of stuff that I can't be supporting. That kind of shit that they do. That's like power tripping that people start to do. Often when they start to get some fame and recognition, they start to feel a little bit threatened about losing it, and then they start to, hurt people or fuck with people, right? So. Yeah, I've been making that same conclusion with Nick and Sarah, whatever. But I can't necessarily blame him. But I also worry a little bit about ex-military people. But we watch Kit and Marx, The Political Matrix. They're both like, being ex-military doesn't rule you out of being a member of the independent media, but it does make a lot of us suspicious. But that being said, not being affiliated with military doesn't necessarily make you perfectly innocent, like doesn't make you any less suspicious or more trustworthy. So we all just have to evaluate everyone accordingly. So what's up, Jimmy? Good to see you. Back to my content here. So I wanted to talk briefly about Progressive International, because that was, I think Jacqueline mentioned the land flotilla, if you want to call it that, going through Egypt. And I thought in my research that Progressive International was funding them. I might be wrong about that, but because I was looking in to see if Progressive International is funding the Freedom Flotilla, if they're funding both, to see if they're connected. And not all the same groups are necessarily, like, they're kind of all tied into this NGO ecosystem, but they might not necessarily every organization be supporting the exact same initiatives. But so Progressive International, supporting that land coalition, is involved with the DSA, like Sunrise Movement, and DM25, right? So these get to be red flags to me, and I don't really have to go really looking into it further than that. I'm already like, oh, I see DSA and like Code Pink and Social Democracy and DM25, and I'm like, okay, I'm done with it. These are not the true left, right? But maybe that's a little bit preemptive judging. So other people want to make a little bit more of a investigation into it, feel free. I'm going to revisit this topic I don't know about that claim, Kitty, but that's an interesting tidbit of information that I was not really heard about. But so I wasn't wanting to get too deep into this, so I'll just leave that for now, and I'll get back to that topic of progressives. Well, actually, maybe just there's like another. I'm gonna get probably going for a long time this tonight, just because I get scatterbrained and I want to talk about everything. But I guess I got the mic today, so why not? Whatever. I hope you guys don't mind going for a bit of a ride here. So, but just briefly on the topic of progressivism, it's kind of good to try and get like a historical context. This was written on my birthday last year, 2024. So this was the Hendrickson Report, Progressivism, the Undoing of Society, or a Way Forward. Just a very brief look at this to sort of get an idea of what progressives used to be or what they're claiming to be now, and if they've really changed in the meantime. So progressivism is not a new term, eclipsing the populist period of the late 19th century, which embraced a radical agrarianism that was tied to grassroots democracy. Potpourri of thinkers and practitioners seized the opportunity to use the centralized administrative and technological power of government to make wide-ranging civil, economic, and social change, nationalizing democratic institutions, stretching the meaning and application of constitutional principles and precedents, all for what they believed would bring about the flourishing of humanity. Is the pursuit and embracing of progressivism, however, the way forward? We contend it is not. These are probably Iowans for Tax Relief Foundation. They're probably right-wingers, probably Republicans, but let's just read this to see what they have to say. Progressives or modern liberals are also referred to as managerial liberalism because of their support for the administrative state and the resulting big government that has emerged. Its embrace of a government directed by experts who were trained in disciplines and vocations necessary for contributing to the advancement of society clash with the Founding Fathers' philosophy. Oh no, the Founding Fathers' philosophy that I don't exactly agree with. What the horror. Oh well. So the founders believed human nature was corrupt and flawed, and therefore it was critical to limit the role of government, including the unchecked capacity of administrators and elected officials. Too bad that the Founding Fathers themselves were corrupt and flawed, so we shouldn't exactly take their word as gospel. So in Federalist 51, for example, James Madison wrote, "But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself." Sounds kind of a good point, right? So even Alexander Hamilton believed in a federal government. Actually, I should make sure that I haven't fucking dropped out again. Okay, good. Everyone's still here. So I might get lost on a rabbit hole on this one. I'm just going to try and keep going on it until I find a good space to stop. So even Alexander Hamilton believed in a federal government that was checked and balanced. In Federalist 70, even though he argues for an energetic executive, the energy is expended is limited. The executive's responsibility is to promote good government, protect the community against foreign attacks, engage in a steady administration of the laws for the protection of property, justice, and the security of liberty. Not sound like the chief executives today who, for example, wield nearly unchecked administrative power through executive orders, right? So maybe it's the progressive tradition that's being attacked by Donald Trump right now. But it's important to remember that the progressive tradition is like proven to be a failure. This is where I'm reading an article written by a Republican, and I can find some things that I agree with them, ironically enough, in their critique of progressives and stuff. Not that I actually agree with the Republicans on a lot of things. So, but the progressive tradition in American politics is strong. It exists not only at the national level, but also at the state level. During the late 19th and early 20th century, progressivism influenced state politics in terms of agrarian radicalism and progressive reform movements. As an example, both Minnesota and Wisconsin were influenced by progressive politics. In Minnesota, the Nonpartisan League and the Democrat Farmer Labor Party established the groundwork for progressive and even socialist politics and policies. But on the national level, progressivism was found within both the Republican and Democrat parties. During the late 19th century, progressives found a champion with the populist agrarian William Jennings Bryan, who captured the Democrat Party presidential nomination with his fiery Cross of Gold speech, and the Republican Party also had a progressive wing. The progressives in the Republican Party were under the leadership of President Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt, and Robert La Follette, among others. Both Roosevelt and La Follette would bolt the party in 1912 and 1924 and run as a third-party progressive presidential candidates. In 1912, Roosevelt was the Bull Moose Progressive Party, and in 1924, La Follette was a Progressive Party nominee for president. And I think I don't know if it's in this article, they say that Woodrow Wilson was a progressive American Democrat or whatever. And that gets kind of like to the period of history that I was analyzing in my research on Zionism at the Hague. So it's kind of important to try to remember what's happening in the U.S. at this time too, because the U.S. was just becoming like taking over from the British, and getting their American hegemony like underway. And this is the Hague conferences on Zionism and stuff were the Zionist conferences all over Europe were happening around this time and stuff. So all these things are happening in correlation with each other. So, but there is another article about progressivism that was a little bit kind of making a better point, just briefly from Princeton. And I'm getting distracted on this. I got to get to the main point of the show today, but I still got we're only 47 minutes in. So, but what I wanted to tie in with progressivism is it sort of morphs into technocracy, and this profession. If we have criticisms of the professional managerial class, what we're kind of criticizing is progressivism and technocracy, because they're, social democracy, progressivism, technocracy, that's all kind of turning into the same blob, if you ask me. But maybe I'm starting to lose some of my the validity of my expertise, to put it ironically like that. So let me blow this up a little bit. So this was American Progressives and the Rise of Expertocracy by Thomas Leonard, Department of Economics at Princeton University. So let's get it from an expert, because that's how we do it now. So the project of 21st century progressivism is to uplift the poor and dispossessed via the humane agency of an expert interventionist state. So too with the original progressives, the progressive era economic reformers who essentially invented the idea of expertise and statism in the service of uplift. But the original progressives, in fact, defended a radically restricted vision of who among the poor and dispossessed deserved uplift, a vision that eugenically sorted the poor into worthy and unworthy categories. And I like to talk about worthy and unworthy and eugenics on noteworthy, because that's what we do here. So a vision that, moreover, depicted the unworthy poor as the cause rather than the consequence of low wages and other economic ills. And that is a thing that we hear to this day. I myself have been personally blamed for my own poverty because of my own mental illness, as opposed to any socioeconomic conditions at play. So making invidious distinctions among the industrial poor, the progressive case for exclusionary labor and immigration legislation was routinely founded on their belief that the labor force should be rid of immigrants, women, blacks, and mental defectives whom they labeled unemployable, parasites, low-wage races in the industrial residuum. The original progressives not only proposed eugenic remedies for the inferiors they blamed for low wages and unemployment, they also promoted an illiberal, retrograde vision of women's economic interests, endorsed survival of the fittest doctrine, so long as the state chose the fittest, advocated imperial adventures, embraced the new modern corporation, ultimately preferring technocracy to democracy. These progressive views, in fact, can be seen to exemplify an illiberal tendency in American progressivism, which manifests in the tension between the progressive desire to uplift oppressed groups and the progressive desire to socially control groups seen to be a threat to the social and economic order. So even in this this Greta flotilla thing, it's a weird kind of thing. But when I read that, I thought, Israel is literally a threat to the social and economic order. And so if someone like Greta is actually authentic and genuine about wanting to see the dying, like the genocide, come to an end, and actual peace like brought forward, I'm sure she literally has a progressive desire to socially control the group that is a threat to the social and economic order. And so that's where socialists too have this desire to control, like Nazis, like the whole special military operation was about demilitarizing the Nazis, right? So that's about socially controlling a group, right? So it's about what the perception of a threat to the social and economic order, or about the reality of a threat to the social and economic order. But when I read all of this all together, I just see that if you have a progressive approach to these types of problems like the genocide in Gaza, I think your progressivism is doomed your strategy to fail, right? So if you really want to help people, let's try and stop being social democrats. Let's try and stop being progressivists. Let's try and take socialism seriously. So let me move on from that. We want to talk some more about progressivism again another day. Sounds good. But the topic of today was about Zionism in The Hague, and I think actually starting with an intro about that progressivism and the eugenic tendencies of progressivism, it kind of is a good it's a good foundation for the discussion of Europe's anti-Semitism, and their solution of Zionism is like this progressivist kind of mentality of eugenics, where like we're trying to help this oppressed group that we're the ones oppressing, and we just can't stop oppressing them. So let's encourage them to go oppress somebody else, so that we can stop oppressing them, because if we don't get rid of them, we just can't stop abusing them. So please, let's encourage them to go abuse another group that we care even less about. So that's the whole insane solution of Israel that the United Nations came up with, has been pushing for the past 80 years. And when people try and tell me or are advocating that Zionism needs to be, or that the UN is how we need to resolve that conflict, I really need people to kind of understand that the UN isn't really what it claims to be. And so the UN has two particular seats of power, right? New York and The Hague. And those are both, what was New York called before it was called New York? Does everybody remember? It's called New Amsterdam. So, and then like this is just such a big topic, but it definitely really is like for those people who think like decolonial theory is a little bit stupid or like not really Marxist enough. Like this is where like the whole history of the colonialism of the Dutch and the English, and like that's like the birth of capitalism and nationalism and colonialism, like all together. Like it's all part of the same problem. So I don't understand how we can divorce that from our thinking as Marxists. So let's read this article. This was, I don't really know these websites, jck.nl, but I don't know. But this is what comes up when you go looking for history about The Hague. So it says, history about the Jewish influence at The Hague. So Jewish settlement in The Hague dates to the 17th century and the arrival of a number of Portuguese Jewish diplomats, physicians, and merchants. The first Ashkenazic Jew to settle in The Hague, a ritual slaughterer, arrived in 1674. More Ashkenazic Jews followed during the 1680s. By the final decades of the 17th century, two Portuguese Jewish congregations have been founded in The Hague. Both moved from location to location until permanent sites for their synagogues could be found. Congregation Beth Jacob consecrated a synagogue on the Kurt Voorhout in 1707. I wish I had my highlighter because I don't necessarily need to read all of this for the topic, but it's good background to have. So maybe if this is a kind of a boring stream, like the ADD kids today aren't really going to enjoy this kind of stuff, but I apologize if it's a bit dry, but I'll try and get through it without too many interruptions. So, the Ashkenazic community initially conducted their religious services in a private home. They opened their own synagogue in 1723. Despite the arrival of increasing numbers of Ashkenazic Jews, Portuguese Jews maintained control of local Jewish institutions. So this was kind of like I kind of just jumped in the middle of this. I didn't really have, this was a bad segue, my bad. But one of the important things about the Netherlands is it seems to be kind of where the Ashkenazic and Sephardi Jewish communities collide, right? Where they like really begin to influence each other. And it's kind of the origin of the Ashkenazic Jews is another topic. Like this topic touches on so many topics. It's very important to talk about. But I think actually that the Ashkenazic Jews kind of come from Italy and stuff, and spread up through Western Europe, and then the Christians, with all their anti-Semitism throughout the Middle Ages, eventually pushed them out to Eastern Europe. And so a lot of people these days, when they talk about the Ashkenazi Jews, they kind of get these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories from like the far right neo-Nazi people that are trying to connect it to this Khazar, what is that, kingdom, like the Khazars. They're always calling the Khazarian mafia, right? So, but that's like debunked, like a wrong historical theory about the origins of the Ashkenazi Jews that I'm pretty sure is incorrect. There might be some small amount of Jews that came from the Caucasus and the kingdom of Khazar, whatever, but it doesn't look like that's where the vast majority of them came from, especially when you get into like DNA analysis and stuff. So you hear people talk about this this Khazarian mafia stuff, don't necessarily get too caught up in it. Palestinian Nazi SS Waffen Death Squad. I don't know who this is. Seems like a troll, not the kind we like to see around here. Greta said we can hide in her tunnels. Yeah, I'm just going to ignore you for now. Let me get back to my article here. So one thing, a degree of friction existed between the two groups. In 1694, Ashkenazic Jews purchased land for a cemetery on the present-day Scheveningsweg. From the start, Portuguese Jews also buried their dead in the cemetery, but by 1710, the Portuguese had pressured the Ashkenazim into dividing the cemetery into separate burial grounds for the two groups during the same period. The provision and sale of kosher meat was mostly the realm of Ashkenazic Jews. Their prices included a tax to benefit the Ashkenazic poor. This practice was resented by the Portuguese, but in 1710, a solution was found. So I'm not sure if it mentions it here, but it's kind of important to recognize historically at this time, the Portuguese Jews were kind of like the wealthier Jewish community because of their associations with Portuguese colonialism and their involvement with like the Dutch East India Trading Company and stuff like this. So they were the initially, I think, more wealthy community, and then I think over time the Ashkenazi became the more dominant Jewish community in the Netherlands. And I think that's kind of something worth taking note of, considering the Ashkenazis were the more orthodox kind of, we have to be traditionalist and conservative about preserving Jewish culture or whatever. So they're more likely to be like the hardline Zionists that are like Nazis now. And like if the Sephardi Jews were a little bit more not so concerned about following religious practice and stuff like that, they might be more of like the kind of nowadays the kind of Jew who's a little bit like not wanting to support Zionism in Israel because their Jewish identity isn't as strong, and they're kind of treated as not really Jewish enough, probably by like Ashkenazis and stuff, because they've been changed by their journey from whatever throughout Europe from being excluded from Israel and stuff back in the day. So it's like over time, different Jewish groups kind of became less Jewish because of where they went in the world, and then they become resented and rejected by other Jewish communities throughout the world, and they kind of bicker over who's Jewish and what it really means and stuff. And so it gets to be, and that's the same thing that happens with all the religions, right? It's like it doesn't seem to, as much as it's all about uniting and preserving the tradition, like they can never seem to keep their their group from splitting it apart, right? So that's where I kind of find religion to be a little bit exhausting and impossible to understand. So I'm getting a little bit sidetracked. So by the 18th century, growing wealth and international connections provided local Portuguese Jews with a large measure of influence. And this is where that's a nice, subtle way to just say growing wealth and international connections. You mean colonialism and imperialism, right? That's kind of like what at the heart of how do they get their wealth? And there weren't, like, as I was saying, like, it's not just Jewish people, but like the royal families and stuff. Like, they get their wealth from mass murdering people. And when we write about it in history, it just gets written like growing wealth and international connections, right? It's sanitized. So, but a number reached high posts in diplomacy and finance and circulated amongst royalty. Portuguese Jews demonstrated an openness to the culture, art, literature, and music of Dutch society. Within the Jewish world, the Portuguese community of The Hague produced several important rabbis. By the late 18th century, however, worsening economic conditions have reduced many members of the Portuguese community to penury. Despite this, the community continued to produce influential personalities in the centuries that followed. So it's important to understand, like, the Portuguese community, Jewish community, their fortunes kind of decline with the decline of the Portuguese Empire. And then, so it's all about switching sides, knowing where the winds are playing, right? And then, so, like, I wish I could kind of explain this stuff a little bit better. I feel like I'm not doing the greatest, but you got to remember how, like, Spain was dominant in Europe, right? And then they were trying to do this Inquisition stuff and like forcibly convert Jews to Christianity. And so then they forced all these Jews into Portugal, and the Portuguese king was like just as bad, if not worse. And I think they ended up intermarrying with the Spanish queen shortly after anyway. But then they're trying to force the Jews to be slaves or convert to Christianity in Portugal. And a lot of them became like crypto Jews, right? Like they technically converted, but they secretly kept their Judaism. So then when we're trying to understand Europe at this time and everything, and then even with colonialism to the slavery into the Americas and South America and stuff, the story of the anti-Semitism of the Catholic Church and the crypto Jews and everything is a big part of this. That's very difficult to understand and untangle, because there's probably a lot of them that haven't necessarily, like, haven't revealed their identity in a sense that history has recorded, right? So, but that's another topic for another day. I'm just saying it's like important to remember all this history. And then with the Jews from Eastern Europe, the anti-Semitism from the Russian Empire has a lot to do with the founding of the Hague and Zionism, actually. This is where I'm kind of not making much of a point with this article. I feel like I jumped into it at the wrong time, but mentioning the Russian guy, I kind of want to, it struck me as interesting that it was Nicholas II of the Russian Tsar who called for the peace conference at The Hague, and he is notorious for being like a horrible anti-Semite who's allowing pogroms to go on in Russia and in Poland, Eastern Europe and stuff. So it's interesting that Nicholas II of all people calls for the first Hague conference at The Hague, right? When he's the kind of person who he was. So Nicholas II and the call for the first Hague conference. This is from JSTOR. I hate all these pages because they only give you a preview and stuff, and I don't have enough money to actually read all this stuff and get a proper understanding of it. So as much as I seem like maybe intelligent enough, a lot of what I know is just literally based off of reading what little previews here and there I can, and little abstracts and stuff, and trying to piece together what I'm not allowed to see because I don't have enough money to read all these actual journals. So fuck these people controlling all of our information, because they really don't let us know things unless we pay for it. So Palestinian Nazi SS Waffen Desqua. Watch Pro Pill last night. You'll get it. LO. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, that's a go ahead. Watch Pro Pill. That's what's his name? Snow Himbo and Mad Crab. Those guys are pretty awesome. And my handler is Mossad. Okay, always good to have our FBI, CIA, Mossad handlers. What's up, Bob? Whatever. Yeah, that's how. What's his name? Hardlands Media Guy says it. Whatever. Yeah, always got to be worried about what the hell I'm saying, whatever. But it kind of makes it hard to actually say anything and be honest about anything when all we do is worry about our handlers. So, back to this little article here. On August 24, 1898, Michael Muravyev, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, welcomed the members of the Diplomatic Corps of St. Petersburg to his weekly reception at the Foreign Office. This was not to be a routine session. At the outset, each representative received a copy of the now famous circular calling for the convening of an international conference to consider the grave problem created by the development of military forces to proportions hitherto unknown. So just like today, how we have to call peace conferences so that the nukes don't start flying, right? Like even before the nukes, they were starting to get really worried about how incredibly powerful everyone's armies were starting to become. So with this act, the Tsarist regime set into motion the series of events from which the Hague Conference of May-July 1899 eventually emerged. Also initiated by the distribution of the circular were attempts, continuing until the present, to identify the factors which persuaded Russia to recommend such an internal gathering. This paper examines the same perplexing question. Some individuals have argued that the genuine idealism of Nicholas II contributed significantly to the decision to issue the circular of August 24th. I highly doubt that. The Tsar sought to lead mankind into a better world. It was just that simple. Why do we ever want to trust any historian that tries to tell you it was just that simple? There's no such thing as history that was just that simple. Most scholars studying the period, however, have presented that circular in a different light. So, but that's all you can read from that little preview. So I gotta find some other. I think I had a couple other things from about Nicholas. I just got so many things open. Wasn't sure which way I was gonna go, and sorry, bear with me, guys. Okay, here's the other one from about the Tsar. So this is just make sure you guys can see this. Okay, cool. Just kind of stay focused here. So, state policies of Tsar Nicholas II and their influence on the Jewish diaspora of the Russian Empire by Joshua Jared Sohn. And this article seems like I actually have full access to, so I might finish reading this one day, but probably not. Hopefully I actually have the time and inclination, but I appreciate that I have whatever repository.arizona.edu that I can actually read your stuff. And this goes a little bit more in depth than the JSTOR thing as far as the influence on the Jewish diaspora. So just a quick thing about the abstract. A state policy analysis of Tsar Nicholas and his influence on the Jewish diaspora. The coronation of Nicholas II in 1894 marked a shift in the dynamic of Imperial Russia. What was beginning to become a modernized society under Alexander II seemed to be undone shortly within the reigns of both Alexander III and Nicholas II. However, it was Nicholas II who significantly transitioned the empire away from a path toward modernity and instead steered the empire for a path of oppression and economic hardship for all classes but the nobility. Sounds familiar, even though Nicholas and Trump have nothing to do with each other. So the Jewish community in Imperial Russia had been targeted by a series of organized, often violent attacks beginning in the 1800s. This, in addition to discrimination by the general population, caused a wave of anti-Semitism to spread throughout the Russian territories. Those who fled did so due to unfair treatment by the government, rampant ethno-nationalist agendas, and poor economic conditions at the hands of Tsar Nicholas. An analysis of the factors that can lead to economic downturn and inequality among citizens within societies that emphasize authoritarianism and propaganda is essential in understanding the governmental policies that led to the Jewish diaspora of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So if we really want to understand about the movements going on at these times and the political decisions being made by the Jewish diaspora at this time, it's important to understand that the pressures that they're on by the kinds of people who are their contemporaries. So the February Revolution was the culmination of ineffectual leadership of a top-down autocracy that failed to modernize economically in an attempt to maintain control over the population and not spark uprising, leading to the eventual diaspora of many religious minorities, most notably Jews. So that's what I'm saying. What Nicholas's policies in Russia had the effect of doing was creating an economic and domestic crisis because they want to be abusive to these populations to put them in their place or whatever the fuck. But then they also need them economically, desperately, to continue being a part of their, like, being their subjects, right? So then they push a little too hard and people are like, fine, fuck you, we're leaving. And then so what does he got to do? He's got to go schedule this stuff with the Hague and stuff to try and fix the problem that they created with their anti-Semitism, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking is the motivation for the Tsar to call this peace conference. But we kind of want to not get too bogged down. I'm going to be jumping around today. So this was, we want to kind of, what was keeping the focus on the foundation of the International Court of Arbitration, because at this time in 1899, there is no international court. There is no ICC, right? But this is like its birth in a sense. So the final act of the International Peace Conference, Hague, 29th July, 1899. The first Hague Peace Conference of 1899 was convened on the initiative of Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, with the object of seeking the most effective means of ensuring to all peoples the benefits of a real and lasting peace, and above all, of limiting the progressive development of existing armaments. So it's important to understand that the people that are setting up the architecture for like the legal structure of lasting peace are the old monarchies of Europe, okay? Not to forget that kind of crap. So, and the Dutch, they still have their monarchy too. So as far as when you understand the blood ties, how Russia, like the Tsar Nicholas was related to the British royals and the German royals and the Dutch royals, everyone are all literally in bed together for centuries. Now we start to understand who is the ones who had the money and the influence and the power to actually erect what we call the United Nations, whatever, our international bodies of justice. So it's just colonialism. It's modern day neo-colonialism called the UN. Okay, but I just kind of fucking buried the lead, jumped the shark, whatever the fuck. I got ahead of myself. So the conference at which 26 governments were represented assembled on 18th of May 1899 and adjourned on 29th July 1899. It failed to reach agreement on the primary object for which it was called, namely the limitation or reduction of armaments. You could say that again, because look at what's fucking going on nowadays. You couldn't possibly limit or reduce armaments if you fucking, like, if everyone's life depended on it. We can't seem to limit the armaments. So, but adopted the three conventions and the other acts mentioned in the final protocol. So provision was made for the convening of a second conference. This conference lasted from the 15th of June until 18th October 1907. The final acts constitute authoritative statements of the results achieved. They were signed by the delegates but not ratified by the participating states. They have no binding force. Okay. Trying to find the right place to jump to now. Pardon me. So maybe it will be good to pivot to the Times of Israel. Okay, Jacobus Khan, the forgotten Dutch father of Zionism. Let me see what you guys are saying here. What's up, antediluvian atheist? Yeah, you guys are just have a good time chit-chatting today. I won't really be able to address all the things that you guys are saying and deliver this presentation at the same time. So, oh, hey, what's up, Gold Monarch? Good to see you. I got to have you back on sometime shortly. I've been wanting to talk about crypto lately, but there's just so much to talk about. So let's talk about crypto in a few weeks, or let me know when you're free. So back to the story. So Jacobus Khan, the forgotten Dutch father of Zionism. This was written February 14, 2023. Whatever good things we build end up building us, Jim Rohn. Ironic for my topic, right? That they're talking about building something and how it builds us. And I'm talking about how maybe the Zionists built the United Nations a little bit more than we realize. So it is hard to imagine that someone from our surroundings, brought up through the modest Dutch values and traditions, has had such an impact on the creation of the Jewish state. Indeed, this person was more than a pioneer and a success-driven person, but arguably also one of the lost founding fathers of the State of Israel that was also present at some of the most historic and meaningful chapters of Jewish memory. Perhaps by delving into the history of this Dutch leading light, we can forge closer relations between Israeli and Dutch values, whilst also striving to apply his philosophy to shape the way the future will unfold. How does an author, banker, diplomat, entrepreneur, and philanthropist contribute to defining what the Netherlands and Israel are today? Loaded question. So, Jacobus Henricus Kahn was born on a hot summer day in The Hague in 1872 to Jewish parents who descended from Jews that had been persecuted on the western borders of the Russian Empire and had settled in the Netherlands with the help of the local Jewish community. As a teenager, he faced anti-Semitism and dedicated himself to a life of education and philanthropy to combat ignorance and hatred towards his people. Indeed, the more anti-Semitism he faced, the closer he became to his people and religion. He desired full equality for all. This is propaganda from the times of Israel. Yet how this small boy going to achieve this? This road was paved for Khan in his time, spending his days working and his nights studying various languages and cultures through books. Destiny's knock on the door arrived through the tragic death of his father, who Jacobus replaced as partner in the Lisa and Khan banking house in 1891 at the age of 19. In this position, the young man became acquainted with local businessmen and important politicians, who helped him tremendously in his mission for justice through networking and philanthropy. In the subsequent decades, this banking house merged with others and eventually formed the renowned ABN AMRO Bank in 1991. International Jewry, including Khan's family, encountered a moment of reflection and actions through the Dreyfus Affair in Paris, which started in 1894. Very important thing to understand what the Dreyfus Affair is. In short, the affair consisted of the accusation that French officer Alfred Dreyfus provided the German Empire with secret documents. He was ultimately cleared of the charges after a decade. After hearing about the Dreyfus Affair in Paris, in which political anti-Semitism became widespread, and having read Herzl's Judenstaat in 1896, was published, Khan became committed to improving the future of Jews in Europe, and as such traveled to Switzerland as one of the few Dutch representatives at the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897. So these Zionist Congresses start in 1897, and then they kind of are a backdrop to World War I, and then they start colonizing Palestine in the 1920s, roughly, before then even. And then World War II happens, and then 1948, and then the Nakba happens. So this is definitely, all this stuff has to be analyzed, how it relates to each other, right? So after extensive conversations about a Jewish homeland with Zionist pioneers, he offered his services to Herzl's circle as head banker. However, Herzl's dedication to a temporary Jewish homeland in Uganda and his insistence on expensive projects without financial planning caused extensive disputes between Herzl and Khan. Regardless, Khan befriended ideologically aligned members of the Zionist cause as political Zionists who preferred Jewish self-determination through a state, rather than the practical Zionists who solely preferred Zionist immigration to the Ottoman region as guests under the local administration. So that's kind of an important understanding. Just making sure I'm still here. Good. It's kind of important to understand that there was a bit of a split in the Zionist movement before the establishment of Israel. They're trying to figure out how to actually make it happen. And there's the political Zionists versus the practical Zionists. And this split is kind of reflected throughout Judaism for thousands of years, where it's like the traditionalists versus the pragmatists, like the assimilationists. And so there's always those hardcore conservatives in every movement. And though the hardcore conservatives won out, I think it's fair to say, in the creation of the Zionist state. So briefly, probably don't have time to get to everything, but this mentioning of the immigration to the Ottoman region brings me to another article I wanted to read after this one. It's called The Long Relationship Between the Netherlands and Turkey, Lesson on the Importance of Long-Term Diplomatic Relationships. So that is an important missing piece as far as when people are trying to understand this crazy ass like history. The relationship that the Dutch had with the Ottoman is very important as to how, and then like you got to remember that these like national powers or whatever, as much as they have beneficial relationships and work together or whatever, they will, if they have an opportunity, undermine and backstab and destroy the other nation if they have the opportunity. So it was the British who destroyed the Ottoman Empire, like, but it was also kind of all of Europe like weakened it, and other parts of the I don't really know enough about Ottoman history or whatever, but if you make enough enemies on your borders, right, then you kind of just all your enemies work together to make you fall, and then they eat your carcass and then go back to fighting each other, right? So that's kind of sort of thing that happened to the Ottomans. And so I'm thinking that the Dutch seem to have played the Ottomans into taking Palestine off their hands, right? So same with the British. So because the Ottomans used to control Palestine, but the Ottoman relationship with the Dutch was extremely important for them to have those lucrative access to those trade routes to like India and Southeast Asia in order to secure their routes like around Africa or whatever. It was kind of important for them to have both, right? So I think the relationship with the Ottomans is kind of overlooked because people understand how the Dutch had the sea routes around Africa. So, but getting a little distracted. So back to this Israel article. Might want to take a drink here. A lot of reading today. So now that Khan found a project he could commit himself to passionately, that doesn't look too. Let me see where I find. Okay, now that Khan found a project he could commit himself to passionately, he returned to the Netherlands and pushed local Jewish communities and Chief Rabbi Joseph Dunner to form the Nederlandisch Zionistenbond in 1899, same year the Peace Conference, as well as a bank to finance future Zionist emigration. He went as far as attempting to garner support from Queen Wilhelmina and the Dutch government. His efforts echo into modernity as the Nederlandisch Zionistenbond still exists as Federatie Nederlands Zionisten. Unfortunately, he was too committed to the international Zionist movement to fully immerse himself in the Dutch branch, meaning he became entangled in the Zionist organization's international operations due to his expertise and network following Herzl's death in 1904. It's important to understand who Herzl is as well. I don't know if I have something about him. I don't want to get too bogged down on trying to make sure everyone understands who everyone is, but you can kind of get these people mixed up because there's Hirsch and Herzl, and they're not the same people, but they are both like important. And so, yeah, I don't see it or whatever, but I think it's trying to distinguish whatever. Herzl was like the Zionist. He's considered the godfather of Zionism, was the one main guy who is responsible for making it happen. And Hirsch is like Andrew Carnegie kind of philanthropist billionaire, but they're both very important in all of like this like Zionism stuff. I think like Hirsch, the philanthropist billionaire guy, was more like, oh, would be better for Jews to assimilate. So he would be maybe less of a Zionist, but still extremely important for the entire Jewish community. And so his wealth inadvertently, indirectly still benefits all kinds of Zionists. I'm sure if you go do the digging, but getting distracted. So back to the article. So for years, Khan traveled between The Hague and various European cities to garner support and funds for the Zionist organization. However, his dream of setting foot in Eretz Israel had finally come in 1907 when he was requested to monitor the local developments and financial feasibility of Jewish immigration to the region. To document his travels and introduce Europeans to the Jewish connection to the land, Khan wrote Eretz Israel, the Jewish Land, at the prestigious Leiden University in 1908. The book was a stellar success among Jews and non-Jews alike and was arguably the first book written about modern Zionism in Dutch. The book also gave great demographic, agricultural, and historical information which were utilized later by the Zionist organization to familiarize itself with the land. When French and German translations were made in 1910, it was feared by European and Turkish lawmakers who dreaded conflicts with the Sultan. Istanbul certainly was not content to hear that Khan was the first Jew to make a purchase of land near Jaffa in 1907, which would become the first plot of land in Tel Aviv. However, if we get around to reading that next article, you will see that the Turkish and Dutch relationship is quite complicated, or not necessarily. After returning to the Netherlands, Khan established a Jewish Agricultural, Livestock, and Dairy Preparation Association in 1910 in order to train Jewish youth on how to cultivate land prior to their immigration to Eretz Israel. Khan became massively successful in achieving aliyah from Dutch Jews, and funds steadily increased for his project. However, everything came to a screeching halt in 1914 when the First World War broke out. With Khan being the only prominent Zionist leader from a neutral state, he acted as intermediary in the forwarding of mails and funds in Europe between various Zionist leaders from the United Kingdom to Lithuania. His operations thrived during this time, but he was met by major opposition after the war's end. To elaborate, he got in a scuffle with Chaim Weizmann's Zionist leadership and decided to form the Hague opposition branch in the Zionist organization as a reaction. Khan argued that Weizmann's overly optimistic presentation and financial policy were unrealistic and would sour relations with local European leaders and sponsors. He criticized the proposed salaries of Zionist officials and the disregard towards a balanced budget, which would supposedly doom Zionists and Jews in Europe. This opposition had little influence, but was correct in retrospect, especially since land prices were pushed up by the purchasing policy of the organization's leadership. Not sure how much of this background information is necessary because we're still not exactly understanding the relevance of this Khan character, but I hope it mentions it in this article, but I might have to go digging around for another thing about him, but I'm pretty sure he was instrumental, or he managed to gain a prominent position in like the League of Nations, kind of the International Court of Arbitration when it was newly established. Like this guy very deeply involved in the establishment of the Zionist congresses and actively moving colonists and settlers to Israel before it was even a nation. When he is given a prominent position in the International Court of Arbitration and stuff like this, that's not like, is maybe just one example, but if we can start to find other examples, this is a very prominent person, right? Even like sometimes it might just be one or two people, but depending on how influential they were over the course of history, it makes a big difference. So hopefully I can make my case effectively. So let's keep reading to see if it gets to mention that stuff that I just brought up. Regardless, Khan decided to learn more about Eretz Israel and hoped his research would influence the organization whilst he still continued to support the Zionist movement financially. He returned to the land in 1920 and insisted on establishing good relations with the Arab population in attaining a state. Allegedly, the two-state solution bullshit, right? Allegedly, Khan studied Arabic and pushed for all Jews in the land to learn the language as well, serving as a bridge to create civil peace, while trying to carry out colonization and gaslight them into thinking that you have the right to be there. So practically an expert on the region, he was requested a progressive Practically a progressive expert technocrat on the region, he was requested to return to Jerusalem in 1924 by the Dutch government to act as first consul of the Netherlands. The Dutch government preferred having a non-Zionist in the position, but entrusted Kahn due to his wise and diplomatic character with the locals. In Jerusalem, he worked tremendously to make Jewish immigrants settle without difficulties on their purchased land. He even oversaw the first constructions of Tel Aviv and handled the financial accounts of many immigrants. Being relieved to practice Hebrew and Judaism in his ancestral home, he noted that this was the proudest moment of his life. However, in 1927, his wife fell ill and the family returned to The Hague. Returned to home. Home is where the heart is, eh? So, well into his 50s, Kahn still desired to be engaged as banker and philanthropist in the city he had learned to love and appreciate. In desiring a better future of tolerance and knowledge, Kahn became instrumental in the renewal of Dutch secondary education. He reformed styles of education based on non-punishment and student engagement ideas of professors Ligthart and Casimir, and created a common substructure for secondary students, followed by a split into HBS and gymnasium. Moreover, he was among the founders of the Nederlandse Lyceum in The Hague. That's like a gym. So one thing about the Nazis is they were very big about physical fitness. I think we talked about that one time already. When rumors of a German invasion spread in 1939, Kahn desired to diplomatically negotiate with the Third Reich to spare the Jews of the Netherlands. And that failed, he was offered a chance to leave the Netherlands. However, his family stood in solidarity with Dutch Jews and refused to leave unless the safety of Dutch Jewry could be guaranteed. He was offered the chance once again in 1940 following his forced retirement due to being a Jewish banker, but he refused once again. Along with more than 80% of Dutch Jews, Kahn's family was deported and killed. His family was first transported to Barneveld and then to Theresienstadt in Czechia. His wife perished in 1944, and Jacobus himself was murdered in 1945. So, like Herzl, Kahn was tragically absent to witness the fruition of his goals. 3 short years after his passing, David Ben-Gurion read the Israeli Declaration of Independence in a Beit Dizengoff in a city built on Kahn's purchased land. However, Kahn's enlightened legacy is present as the principles of equality and liberalism are to be found in the words of the document which regard non-Jewish minorities in the Jewish state. Kahn's role in Jewish and Dutch history as a moderate Zionist international banker, philanthropist, and author is overshadowed by narratives that efforts to establish Israel are rooted in a handful of individuals who survived the Holocaust. So, yeah, I forget now, but I was reading some other stuff about this guy, and I thought that he was instrumental. I hope I didn't just make a silly fool of myself about mixing up my historical characters, but I might have to, because this is what happened. I lost some of my sources there. Bear with me here for a moment here. I'm going to just briefly check out I'm pretty sure if I just like Google Kahn's International Law Legacy, yeah, here it is. I just forgot. I called up a whole bunch of other, oh, come on, stupid cookie stuff. Oh, that's the wrong one. Oops. Sorry, guys. This is what happens when you do the streams on your own. I just gotta double check. There we go. Jacobus. Gotta remember the full name. Oh, may have gotten mixed up with somebody, but that's okay. Okay, but there was other characters too. So let's try and move on here. I had that other article I mentioned was the long relationship between the Netherlands and the Turkey. But actually, before I go to that, it's important to, because at the end of that Times Israel article, it was mentioning how the guy's family got deported and they got killed in the Holocaust. So I should probably go to the Jerusalem Post article, Netherlands' so-called anti-Zionism, which is okay here, just to get a little bit of a modern an Israeli Zionist take on the Netherlands today, because they collude with the EU and everything in carrying out their genocide, but then when they don't get their way with the Dutch or like the English or Canadians or Americans or whatever, we see how they trash the shit out of us, right? So this is kind of an example of that. So the Israelis are kind of like, hey, let's not forget how Nazi-esque the Netherlands were. They're like, let's actually not forget that. Like, there is a whole lot of like the Dutch were considered Aryan brothers of the Germans, right? And that's not for nothing. So, oh, my computer's a little bit slow here. Just bear with me. Nope, that was the wrong article. Oh, there it is. I have a hard time seeing the tabs when my camera covers them up. So, the Netherlands' so-called anti-Zionism, and so anti-Israeli feelings are closely intertwined with the Holocaust, since the Netherlands has never admitted guilt and has been hushing it up its past for more than 70 years. So this is why it's kind of important to be careful about when I talk about this. Also anti on like the communist left, right, are anti-Israeli, but then so are the Nazi right. So this article is by Asaf Simon, September 10th, 2016. During Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to The Hague on Tuesday in 2016, the Jerusalem Post quoted diplomatic sources as saying that the Dutch government is friendly but unable to ignore public criticism of Israel over the Palestinian issue that has grown in the Netherlands in recent years. The excuse of public criticism has been employed for many decades in the Netherlands. The ministers and heads of government will smile and apologize. There are always others in the coalition government who oppose Israel, or public opinion is unfortunately against Israel. However, public opinion in the Netherlands is to a great extent formed by the very same government. I have worked as a journalist and have followed the Dutch press closely for some 35 years. Most Dutch journalists do what they are told. The underlying problem is anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, according to the Israelis, are the same thing. So, but that's not what we believe here. Not some large stream of public opinion, right? So that's like, doesn't really understand what he's talking about. So he just assumes, yeah. Anyway, anti-Israeli feelings are closely intertwined with the Holocaust, since the Netherlands has never admitted guilt and has been hushing up its past for more than 70 years. Having arrived in Israel this July after spending most of the past 40 years in the Netherlands, I have had first experience of the ingrained anti-Semitism and the so-called anti-Zionism pervading Dutch society. In his recent Jerusalem Post article, A Short Review of Dutch Anti-Israel Incitement, Gerstenfeld writes that the distorted positive image people still have of the Netherlands is largely due to the influence of the diary of Anne Frank. For decades, Dutch publishers would not touch biographies of Jews who survived the war, with the exception of Anne Frank's diary. Why? As a small girl with no experience of the rapid changes in the treatment of Jews by the Dutch in the Netherlands, Anne had only a view of a much publicized chestnut tree. Her diary would never have been printed had she had a view of the street. As the only one in my family with a light complexion, I have often sat stunned while listening to Dutch people talk about Jews. That is the fault of the Jews that they were sent to Auschwitz. That it is the fault of the Jews that they were sent to Auschwitz is the most widespread conviction. That's what this Israeli writing in this Jerusalem Post article has to say about Dutch people today. I don't know. I've never been to the Netherlands. If someone watching is from the Netherlands or knows anyone who's Dutch, you could maybe let me know if that's correct or not. But what I'm struck when I'm reading this kind of thing is how Israel and Israelis have kind of come to expect to be able to manipulate European guilt over the Holocaust to their advantage, and I'm sure it works very well. So once when I asked a survivor and son of a survivor if they thought the Dutch silence about the Holocaust had something to do with feelings of guilt, the two of them began laughing hysterically. So yeah, that's kind of gets the point across. Well, actually, this is a good thing to point this out. This little bit of history is pretty damning, right? So it was. She makes references to a book by Isaac Lipschitz, which has not yet been translated or whatever. It details how the Dutch authorities proceeded to further rob and humiliate Jews after the war by fining them for not paying taxes while in Auschwitz. Also, Jewish institutions were forced to sell their properties after the war because they could not afford municipal taxes. These properties are now probably worth hundreds of millions of euros. Landlords losing properties, oh boohoo. That many of the same bureaucrats worked for the Dutch government before, during, and after the war is apparently viewed in the Netherlands as a secret, which is necessary to hush up to this day. So a lot of this denial of complicity in genocide is about avoiding accountability, right? Not wanting to be at a Nuremberg trial. 3 years ago, a non-Jewish Dutch student discovered that survivors who were taxed and fined for not paying property taxes while in the camps had not yet been fully repaid. Recently, the Amsterdam City Council agreed to repay the taxes, just not to those who were forced to pay them. It was evidently a last snub to the survivors for spoiling the tolerant and progressive image many have of the Netherlands. So when we see the modern Dutch government is collapsing because this Geert Wilders, like, not getting his way on immigration, not being racist enough to the Muslim immigrants and stuff, it's like, as much as they have some problems with Zionism, they also have some problems with like literal Nazism still to this day. So it's a kind of a, I would say, a tenuous alliance that they have, these Zionists and Nazis that are literally working together. I don't see how it's going to last long term. They do kind of historically hate each other, and I'm just kind of wondering and waiting how long that's going to last, where they're going to stay in bed together. I actually was doing another research project as well as this one that we'll get to maybe another day. If you guys are interested, you guys can let me know. I think that the part of the birth of like how the Nazis and the Zionists actually got over their animosity towards each other has to do with Argentina, because I was reading about these Jewish philanthropists in like the turn of the century, like 20th century, sorry. There was like a whole wave of Zionist emigration to Argentina a few decades before all the Nazis fled in their rat lines to Argentina. So ironically, there's a huge population of the Jewish diaspora ended up in Argentina, and then a huge diaspora of Nazis ended up in the same place. And then Juan Perón, the Argentinian fascist president in like the 1940s and 50s and stuff, was basically instrumental in saying like, hey, you guys better learn how to get along, because whatever, blah blah blah. Well, I'll have to talk about that another day, because without that information in front of me, I won't be able to do it justice. But that is a very interesting thing to notice, that there was a large population of Zionists in Argentina that was instrumental, as well as the Dutch were, in sending funds and colonizers with farming skills and whatnot to Israel before the Nakba happened. And yeah, that's just, I'm getting a little bit bogged down in history here, but it's kind of good to do. I see 15 of you guys watching. It's good to see you all. I hope I'm not boring you. I see Abby saying she's coming. Good to see. I'm listening, but when I finish with my mom, I'll be there. No problem. Sounds good. I'm just holding it down for now. Yeah, it is a Hasbara news. I hate the Jerusalem Post. Yes, I agree. I'm sorry for having to waste your time with that a little bit, but it is, they're useful, as well as the Times of Israel, there, in using their words against them, just like they use our word. They try to use our words against us all the time. So it's important to let them see what your enemies are saying. Believe them when they show you who they are the first time. Hysterical laughter, but they wrote the article anyway. Yeah. You get an accusation. Yeah. They are the Oprah of anti-Semitism accusations. Yep. Yeah, well said. What's up, KYE? Good to see you. Lipschitz is a funny name, like Butkus. Yeah. And that's why the Dutch wore wooden shoes. Sure. Okay, let's get back to good. Cookie saying I'm definitely not boring you. Yeah, I just never know because you never know what people are into these days, right? So, but I'm sure I could like drive this point home a little bit better if I had been a little bit more organized. I'm not the most organized person. It's difficult to be organized. So let's just see where should I go from here. So I was looking into a little bit of like the rise of nationalism because that's kind of important too, as far as uh, the concept of nationalism is relatively new too, and it was not really um, it wasn't around for very long before it started to be embraced by Jewish people, and the idea of the idea of Zionism, the birth of Zionism, is kind of connected to the birth of nationalism. And then there's a good questions like chicken or the egg, what came first, capitalism or nationalism? And so it's kind of important to look into people like Johann Gottfried Herder, who's apparently the father of uh, nationalism. And I'm going to have to get back to you on that a little bit because I'm finding articles that are saying that he's a fierce opponent of colonialism, cultural arrogance, and racism. And then I also find articles that are talking about the racial philosophy of Johann Herder. So I need to determine what's really going on there. But it's hard for me to believe that the guy who invented nationalism was not a racist. But that's what it seems to be that he claimed to be. So, but whether or not he decided that he wasn't wanting to be racist. It seems like a lot of people have decided to use nationalism for racial theory. So maybe I will just briefly. We should talk about the East India Trading Company, even if I don't really manage to segue into it in the cleanest of ways, because it will kind of. I've came across a few characters historically here that are kind of get the point across, right? So Isaac de Pinto was a Dutch merchant and banker of Portuguese Sephardic Jewish origin who was one of the main investors in the Dutch East India Company, as well as a scholar and philosophe who concentrated on Jewish emancipation and national debt. Pinto published mainly in French and once in Portuguese. According to historian Richard Popkin, Pinto was one of the very few Jews of the 18th century, before Moses Mendelssohn, able to operate and express himself in the mainstreams of European culture. And the way that he was able to operate and express himself was in the colonial ventures of the East India Company, right? What does that tell you about who they're like, the people who are willing to allow the Jewish people like to be a popular influential figure, whatever, they allow them to do that if they are willing to be of service for imperialism and colonialism. So food for thought. um, Pinto had his Brit Milah on 18th of April, 1717. This likely means he was born on 10th of April. Received his bar mitzvah in 1730. On 29th of December, 1734, the 17-year-old Pinto was married to Rachel Nunez Enrique. The couple never had any children. In 1748, Pinto helped William IV of Orange, sending or lending him money to defeat the French at Bergen-op-Zoom. In return, he asked for the removal of measures against Jewish merchants, forbidding them to sell clothes, pickles, gherkins, or fish on the street. He proposed opening the guilds to Jews and sending the poorest to Suriname, which is in South America. In 1750, he was appointed president of the Dutch East India Company by the stadtholder. In 1755, he was visited by Frederick the Great, traveling incognito through the Netherlands. Together they visited Gerrit Bramkamp, who was a successful Roman Catholic distiller, timber merchant, and art collector from the Netherlands. So this is where you start to see like Roman Catholics and Zionists. Like, where does that alliance begin? I'm curious about that. because there definitely is a weird Roman Catholic Zionist thing happening, like that needs to be investigated. So, so Pinto was a man of broad learning, but he did not begin to write until nearly 45, when he acquired a reputation by defending his co-religionists against Voltaire. His first known published work is the Patriotic Tribute from 1747 to 1748, which consists of 3 essays in which de Pinto reflects on the public finances of the 18th century Dutch Republic. In 1762, he published his essay Sur le luxe at Amsterdam. In the same year, Pinto published Apologie pour la nation juive ou Réflexion critique, and sent a manuscript copy of this work directly to Voltaire. Antoine Guénet reproduced the Apologie at the head of his letters de quelques juifs portugais, allemands et polonais à Monsieur de Voltaire. So that's, if you want to know what that was about, like, he was defending the Jewish religion against Voltaire's attacks, in the name of rationalism or something. That's an interesting thing if you want to learn about that, but I don't want to get off the main topic here. It's just I wanted to show you that this guy was like the president of the Dutch East India Company. He was visited by Frederick the Great, whatever. Very, very influential person. And I had another article here about that Dutch East India thing that's probably more relevant to read than this Wikipedia page. But because it's like, yeah, it's an important question. Was East India Corporation built by a Jew, right? This is where, are we anti-Semitic or not, right? Because the anti-Semitic person would knee-jerk and say, oh, I'll bet you the East India Corporation was just built by Jews, run by Jews, and they control everything, right? So it's not the case, right? But it's not like they have nothing to do with it, right? They have their influence, right? So was East India Corporation, historical overview of the East India Company. This is from a website called religiousquestion.com. Was East India Corporation built by a Jew? The establishment of the East India Company in 1600 marked a pivotal moment in the history of international trade, serving as a catalyst for economic expansion and imperial influence that reverberated across centuries. Originally created as a joint stock company fueled by the ambitions of English traders, it aimed to capitalize on the lucrative spice trade in the East Indies. This endeavor evolved into one of the most significant commercial undertakings of its time, indicative of the broader age of exploration and colonialism that defined the early modern era. Formed under a charter granted by Queen Elizabeth I, the East India Company was authorized to trade exclusively in the East Indies. So this is where, it's kind of important to not get mixed up. The East India Company is the British and the Dutch India Company, but they kind of together did so much damage to the world. You just gotta we gotta all learn about them to some degree, right? So I'm sure you guys already know probably all kinds of stuff about this, but for anyone watching who's not a regular in the chat, who doesn't know anything about this, I share this information with you. Hello, Abby. What's up? Not a regular in the chat who doesn't know anything about this. I shared this. You froze there for a moment. What?
Hi.
I can't quite hear you if you got a mic there. Or...
Oh, can you not hear me?
You're muted. I can't hear you.
Okay, I'll come back.
You have to maybe come back then. We'll see you. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll just put you backstage for a minute and then sort out your audio issues. You might have to leave and then like drop out and then pop back in, but feel free to jump back on stage if you change something out. Oh, your audio is coming in on my end. Perfect, Abby. Do. Okay, then I'll just put you on stage, and if you can say something, then the audience can hear you. But then they'll have to tell me what you say. So we'll have to sort this out, guys. Sorry. There's a lot of weird shit going on with StreamYard today. I'm thinking it's kind of a little bit peculiar to today, but we'll see what's going on tomorrow. Yeah, Jacqueline can hear Abby too. Okay, well, yeah, I'll just keep reading here. So to not waste your guys' time and leave you with too much dead air here. So, formed under a charter granted by Queen Elizabeth, the East India Company was authorized to trade exclusively in the East Indies, operating largely in present-day India, Sri Lanka, and parts of Southeast Asia. The founding charter provided the company with a unique monopoly on trade, which allowed it to bypass the fierce competition already present among other European trading entities. The company's early trading expeditions were primarily focused on securing valuable spices, silk, and cotton, which were in high demand in European markets. As the company established its foothold in the Indian Ocean, it became increasingly involved in political affairs. The lack of central authority in many regions of India allowed the East India Company to negotiate treaties, form alliances, and eventually to exert military power. By the late 17th century, the company had begun to gain significant territorial control, the establishment of fortified posts that provided security for merchants and goods alike. So this is where this period of history, you've got a company carrying out the colonialism that's now done by armies such as the IDF. So, but I mean, we still got a lot of mercenaries and stuff these days, like in Ukraine, are doing a lot of the fighting. But that's one of those things that's different about this period of history. Like in Canada, we had the Hudson's Bay Company that was granted an illegal monopoly by the British Crown, and they go around just granting illegal monopolies all over the place, stealing all that wealth, and then keeping it for centuries. So the growth of the East India Company was not merely a matter of commerce, it was intrinsically tied to the social and cultural dynamics of the time. A diverse population of traders, including not just Englishmen, but also Portuguese, Dutch, French, and other nationalities, engaged in this strive for dominance over these lucrative routes. Alongside these players, we observe the involvement of Jewish merchants whose roles were integral to the trade networks of the period. Their influence shaped economic activities and helped establish commercial ties between Europe and the East, yet remains a topic of considerable debate among historians. So I think it's kind of important to try to not get a little bit anti-Semitic or whatever about the Jews are behind everything, whatever, but to try and understand that the Jewish role in these kinds of colonial endeavors is maybe like a little bit more integral than some of the other players in that they are the connections between the various European powers. So when the English have a problem with the Dutch, they can't exactly talk to each other, but the Jewish Dutch and the Jewish English can maybe be the intermediary. Same thing when with the Portuguese and the French have a problem with the Dutch, it's probably their, but I just leave it at that. Okay. So back to this. Throughout the 18th century, the East India Company expanded its reach into the interior of India, capitalizing on local conflicts and political fragmentation. The acquisition of Bengal in 1757 was a watershed moment in the company's history as it led to immense profits and unprecedented power. Following the Battle of Plassey, the company not only secured vast riches but also began to function almost as a sovereign entity, establishing its own administrative and legal systems. As the East India Company solidified its control, the tensions between British interests and Indian rulers escalated, and that's getting into the other kind of history. That's not about the topic of the day, but the question remains, was the East India Corporation built by a Jew? While the contributions of Jewish merchants were significant, it is essential to contextualize their roles within the broader scope of the diverse trade networks that characterize this transformative period in global history. Exactly. Easier said than done. So I think it might be more constructive. Let me just see if, okay, we're still waiting on Abby, but it's kind of important because I was trying to talk about the Dutch and not the English. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like how I think it's Indonesia was where the Dutch had control, and the British had control of other places like India and stuff. So let me see. This is So this is. I'm not sure. I forget what this article is, but I'll kind of go through it, discover what it is together, see if it's what I wanted to talk about. So Who really ever wants to talk about the English? Am I right? I'm English and I don't even want to talk about the English. Anyway, traces of the Jewish migration to Batavia and how they blended. I hate how these advertisements make it impossible to read this crap. So, for a long time, Jakarta was a multi-ethnic city. Let me make that bigger. Various ethnic groups have been present in Jakarta since time immemorial, including the Jews. Even though there were not as many Europeans, Jews became an important part of driving the economy. Batavia also shared Jewish migration, but the heart of the Indies, in the heart of the Indies, the Jews mingled. They were reliable in all fields, both as soldiers, traders, to government employees. The Jews lived in prosperity. They fused well, even than Hebrew. They are more fluent in everyday Dutch and Malay. Some of this stuff I think is machine translated or something. The sentence structure is a little weird, but I don't know. The arrival of the Jews to the archipelago was closely related to the conquest of Jakarta, which was later changed to Batavia by the Dutch Trading Association, the VOC, in 1619. The conqueror of Jakarta, VOC Governor General Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, encouraged large migrations of Europeans and others to settle down in Batavia. At the same time, the Jews, Chinese, Moors, Japanese, and native peoples, Malay, Balinese, Bugis, Ambonese, became important elements of the Batavian population. At that time, the Jewish population was not only in the city of Batavia, they were also in Omelanden, an area outside Batavia. Some of them lived in Noorwick and Rijswijk, and many of them work as traders by opening large shops and hotels in the area, sell watches, gold, diamonds, gems, watches, glasses, and other commodities. Watches twice for some reason. The toughness of the Jews as merchants at that time can be seen from the success of the Oleslager, Goldenberg, and Ezekiel families. A clearer picture of the Jews in Batavia is also revealed by the writer Jacob Safir. Jacob Safir explored the city nicknamed the Queen of the East for nearly 7 weeks in 1861. The Jewish writer mentioned that there were 20 Jewish families from Germany and the Netherlands who lived in the heart of the Dutch East Indies, Batavia. Their job classification is as traders, soldiers, to retirees. Colonizers. So Safir's expertise in extracting information first started with visiting a Jewish elder. That sounds like an expert in torture, or like he's just like a writer guy, right? So it's first started with visiting a Jewish elder who must have kept a lot of information about his compatriots in Batavia. William Hochgesund, who arrived in Batavia during the Revolution. Is that what they're calling it? I don't know if that's a violation of the use of the term revolution, but arriving for the first time in Batavia as a Dutch soldier, trading was a profession he practiced after leaving the military service, said Safir. Quoted by Rami Zarman in the book Under the Power of Anti-Semitism, Jews in the Dutch East Indies, 1961 and 1942. That's weird. The dates are backwards. What the hell is with this article? But of course, are they really going to go around making accusations about anti-Semitism in the Dutch East Indies when they're colonizers there first, right? Go home. Perhaps the more economically promising Indies lands have encouraged him to prefer to settle down permanently rather than return to Europe. The world of commerce under the tricolor flag demands full integrity from the people who are involved in it, he added. However, Hachtgesund's success and prosperity came at a cost of his Jewish identity, faded over time. Comfortable life in Batavia eliminates the episteme, the essence of Judaism that he acquired when he was young. So this is a recurring theme I'm noticing when I'm doing the research here is the Jewish colonizers, when they go to the place that they're colonizing, they're worried that they're losing their essence of their Judaism or whatever. So they maybe the people who stay in with the people that they colonize and intermarry with the people that they colonize become less, like they lose their Jewishness because they're impure now that they've intermingled with the lowly natives. And then like when you look at Israel, there's not Israel, at India, there is a a community called the Bene Israel, like Indian community, and they are. Oh, hey, Abby. They're Indians or Jews that have been shipwrecked in India for like 5,000 years or whatever, and then they like have intermingled with some of the Hindus, and then so they're a part of the caste system, but then they lost some of their Jewishness for a long time, and then now they're recently being re-embraced by the Israelis. That's a very interesting thing to look at when you're understanding the Hindutva fascists' relationship with Israel, and how there's been this Jewish community of Israelis for thousands of years in India, whatever, and then the ones that married with the undesirables or whatever were considered shouldn't be married with the ones who did not marry with the native Indians. So, but I got on a weird. I don't know why I mentioned that, but hey, I hear you this time.
Can you hear me?
I don't know if we're gonna.
You
I
can't
can't
hear
hear
me?
you. No, I can't hear you. Fuck.
That's so
Just one of those
weird.
streams. I can't hear you, but I bet you they can
But I
hear you.
think the audience can hear. Can the audience say if you can hear me? I'll go out again. I don't know what's happening. I have no idea what's happening.
I don't know what you're saying. So
Wow. I checked my mic. I checked my audio.
yeah,
So
so
Bad
Bad
Cookie
Cookies is
said
saying you
they
can hear
can hear
you.
me, but you can't hear me. That's crazy. Um, maybe I should just
My
admin for
shirt
you.
isn't on my end.
I could
It
just.
must be something on my end because I couldn't hear the intro music either, right? Cookies.
Lance,
So it's
my
definitely
fluid
something with my
French
end.
is les a les a bon ton
I got a
roulé.
message saying my
That's my
browser has lost
fluid
connection to your screen
French.
share audio. Try sharing your screen again. But that's not Abby. Here, maybe if I
Les a
plug in my
bon ton
headphones.
roulé, Lance.
Can I hear you? No, I still
I'm
can't hear
I'm
you.
gonna leave again
I'll have
and
to sort this out when we're not live. Oh, yeah, I guess Abby's just gonna have to sit this one out today because I trying to finish up what I'm talking about. We've been going on for more than 2 hours now, eh? Yeah, 2:08. But while I'm talking about this guy, I wanted to focus on this Jan Peterzoon Cohen. He's said to have been of Jewish descent, but Abing's history of Horn gives chiefly negative evidence on the subject of his Jewish connection. The question of his extraction must be left undecided. And then when you look at who this person was on the Wikipedia page, why would I want to talk about this random guy from 400 years ago or whatever? I'm trying to understand the Dutch role in colonization and genocide of like Asian peoples before they ever even got around to encouraging Zionism in Israel. It's like genocide is going to genocide, you know? So Jan Peterson Cohen officer of the Dutch East India Company in the early 17th century, holding 2 terms as Governor General of the Dutch East Indies. He was the founder of Batavia, capital of the Dutch East Indies, renowned for providing the impulse that set the VOC on the path to dominance in the Dutch East Indies. He was long considered a national hero in the Netherlands. Since the 19th century, his legacy has become controversial due to the brutal violence he employed in order to secure a trade monopoly on nutmeg, mace, and clove. He led the final Dutch conquest of the Banda Islands in 1621, which culminated in the Banda Massacre, which saw 2,800 Bandanese killed and 1,700 enslaved by the Dutch. This was regarded as an act of genocide and earned him the nickname of Butcher of Banda. So, and his name, Cohen, I feel like, are you kidding me? People are going to actively deny that we can't determine if this guy's ancestry is ultimately Jewish, and I'm like, how many Cohens do we know of? It's like a very well established, but whatever. That's like you got to be careful when you do your research into names and like bloodlines, I guess, because just because somebody has a name doesn't mean they're actually like sometimes the name is a remnant and they're not quite connected anymore. But I find this hard to believe in this case, right? So I wanted to read this. I don't know if I got the time. I'll read a little bit of it, but I'll encourage other people to read this. Long relationship between the Netherlands and Turkey, okay? Because this is like not a good segue from what I was just talking about, but I'm just kind of running out of time and not sure how, because there's some other interesting things that I wanted to get to, but I don't know how to talk my way into that part of the conversation in the next hour without going on and on and on. You guys got other things to watch. So this is the long relationship between the Netherlands and Turkey, written in April 13, 2023. Tensions have escalated significantly in the eastern Mediterranean between Turkey and several NATO members. Also, as far as the Freedom Flotilla, I think it's important to point out that that is a Turkish endeavor, as well as DM25, the Democracy in Europe people being involved. So the boats are Turkish, okay? Tensions have escalated significantly in the Middle East. Since this also involves large geopolitical issues and two ongoing civil wars in Libya and Syria, this is worrying on many levels that Turkey and NATO have escalating tensions. It is also extremely complicated because of historic relationships that predate these events. One interesting relationship that I recently stumbled across is one with the Netherlands. I found this article was fairly well written. I don't know who this Michael Coetzee is, but I'll have to look into that one day. I was in a used bookstore and found the book The Ottoman Empire and the Dutch Republic, A History of the Earliest Diplomatic Relations, 1610-1613. Affiliate link by Dutch historian A.H.D. Groot. It's one of those specific subject books that aren't widely distributed and that historians like to add to their personal libraries. There are a few copies on Amazon. I've linked it to blah, 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 describing a relationship that is now 410 years old. In the early 17th century, the Netherlands was recovering during a short truce in a long war of independence against the Habsburg kings of Spain, the most powerful and rich monarchy in Europe. The revolt against the Spanish came in spurts, but despite the short truce, the Dutch were on their heels, fending off pressure from their neighbors, including the powerful French and also unfriendly the Catholic states of Germany. Even the English were not shying away from probing any opportunity from the conflict that they could take advantage of. Early overtures to the Ottomans. As early as 1566, the Dutch and the Ottomans had reason for common cause. At the time, the Habsburg King Philip of Spain was actively trying to quell Protestantism throughout the Holy Roman Empire. The Spanish Inquisition was used to great effect in rooting out not just Protestants, but also Jews who fled north and south to try to escape. One of these fleeing Jews was Joseph Nazi, who, as it turned out, ironic name, by the way, who, as it turned out, was in the employment of the Sultan Selim II of the Ottoman Empire. Joseph Nazi was an important diplomat for the Sultan. As Spain was expelling Jews and Moors, he was tasked with resettling them in Syria. He was involved in trying to wrest Cyprus from the Kingdom of Venice and cede it to the Ottomans, but that plan was thwarted. And isn't that ironic? This Joseph Nazi was involved in trying to wrest Cyprus from the Kingdom of Venice and cede it to the Ottomans, and nowadays Cyprus is divided in half between the Greeks and the Turks to this day. So just kind of interesting. It is during this precarious time that he began to develop a diplomatic relationship with William of Orange in the Netherlands. He arrived in the Netherlands just before the official start of the 80 Years' War in the fall of 1566, just ahead of a bitter winter. The Inquisition had also been particularly unpopular in the Netherlands, and despite the protests of William of Orange to the King of Spain, persecutions had continued unabated. The Dutch finally revolted the following spring in 1567. Unfortunately, the Spanish had capable leadership and battle-hardened soldiers. The first phase of the war saw many reversals, and over the next 2 decades, the Spanish succeeded in violently reconquering most of the cities that had been lost in the uprising. As it turns out, Spain was simultaneously at war with the Ottoman Empire, so the Protestants had a common enemy. As an emissary of the Sultan, Joseph Nazi was in a unique position to assist. Over the next few years, he worked to secure financial support for the Dutch revolt against Spain. This support finally came through in 1574. While the Dutch Protestants really had little in common with the Ottomans, this was a relationship of convenience that would continue to bear fruit for centuries. So we can see it's very interesting that history shows us there is like a progressive alliance that is formed through relationships of convenience and conflicts of interest and these kinds of things, right? And so there's an ironic kind of freedom of religion aspect to this whole colonialism, imperialism, in that they were able to get over the prejudices of their religious hatred of one another long enough to give birth to capitalism and make everyone hate like progressive religious causes that are, progressive in name only, right? So it's they managed to like push back against like the oppression of Spain, which is the right thing to do as Protestants. But then this is why people don't understand how Protestantism is like the religion of capitalism, even more so than Catholicism. Because if you look at it, it's kind of like Catholicism was more like the religion of feudalism, and Protestantism is like the religion of capitalism. So maybe that's a bad take, but I just find that's a kind of interesting thing to note there. So yeah, the freedom of religion is something interesting, and what brought together the Protestants, the Jews, and the Ottomans against the Catholics, and brought for to be reckoned with. So pardon me. Just see, I got some unstable connections. Just going to give it a moment. I see Abby's back. Are you? I don't know if it. Can you hear me? Can I hear you? Can I hear
Can
you
you
speak?
hear me?
Yeah, no. I got something I gotta fix on my end.
That's
I don't know if I can
interesting. Because
check
the
out my
audience can
settings,
hear
audio
me.
settings, default speakers.
And I can't even
Oh,
admin.
I can hear.
I
There we
can't
go.
click
I
on
can hear
stuff.
you.
Oh,
I
you can
got
hear
you
me
there.
now?
I had to
Okay.
fix the setting. I changed the setting. Yeah, there we go.
But
Yay.
I wanted to like just admin for you in the background, but I can't even do that. Like I can't click
If you
on
can't
stuff
communicate
like
with me, yeah,
well no, it's not even that. I can't like click on comments to show them. It's
right.
not working. I don't know what's happening.
It was doing that to me too. I don't know if it's working again now. I'm just gonna see. Yeah, it's working again. But earlier in the stream, I got booted off a few times. I had to come back in, and I lost the ability to call comments up for a bit, but it's back now. So StreamYard's just fucked today.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up a little bit.
Yeah, I
I
know.
don't even know what I don't even know what you talked about today because what was supposed to happen, everybody, was um he had something he wanted to talk about and discuss. And we do this a lot, Michael, where we say, don't tell me, I want to blind react to it.
Hmm.
So I have no idea what you were talking about
That's
because I was
okay.
gone.
You'll have
So
to
I just
rewatch
came
like
in at
everyone
the
else,
end.
and then you'll be able
I
to
have to
tell me
watch it
things.
later.
Yeah. But I'll try and fill you in a bit. I'm taking a stab at the historical materialism of the relationship between Zionism and the Hague as the court of international arbitration, because I'm considering how, excuse me, everyone had high hopes for the UN and the ICC to be able to legally rule that
Let me cut
Israel
you off for
committing
1 second,
genocide.
Michael. I'm
Yeah,
gonna cut
sorry.
you off for 1 second because I'm trying to change the layout so it's just you and me so we could talk. But
Okay. Yeah, no, I can
it
do that.
can't work.
Okay. Not my
Thank
bad.
you.
Yeah.
There we go.
So I'm just trying to kind of look into, is there any connection or not between Zionism and the UN, right? Like, because like the League of Nations, like the founding of the seat of international arbitration in the Hague and United Nations in New York in particular, seems to me like, why did they get to be the ones that got to? Why are they so special that they get to have all the international people come to them into their city? Why didn't you pick any other city, right? Why wouldn't it be Rome and Italy, right? Well, because that's the old seat of power. It's been faded for a long time. Nobody wants to go treat them like they're the most important people in the world. And then you go, why wouldn't they put it in London or something? Why wouldn't they put it in Paris? Why wouldn't they put it anywhere in, like, really, if you're, I think it should be somewhere in Africa or the Middle East. It should be somewhere like the most centrally located, just to try not to have bias, whatever, where everyone goes there, because it's like to try and not make have to go all the way across the world and try and pick the most central location in the world, wherever that would be.
They had toyed with the Jews, European Jews, by the way, not the original Jews, but European Jews going to Uganda. They had toyed with that.
Right.
They chose Palestine for a reason, and it was an economic reason. It was a reason so they can have some kind of control over the Middle East. It was very calculated.
Right. But in this, just for at the moment, I was trying to say what was behind the decision as to where to locate the international body of arbitration, and it is just like the question of where do you pick where Israel should be, right? It's like a colonizer's decision.
It's a colonizer's decision.
So
if you look, I really can't. My clicker isn't working. Like, I can't touch anything. It's amazing that I'm even here right now. But if you look at like the definition of what Israel means, it's not a people. I mean, it's not a place. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. It's not a place. It's a mindset of a people. The colonizers made it a place.
Right.
Purposely.
Well, this is where the history is very, like, people don't really want to talk about like 70 AD, like back in like the 100 BC and stuff like that, because it gets to be like hard to really have a good conversation about that. But that's kind of important to understand why is the Jewish community so fixated on the idea that they did have a homeland in Israel, because they did have a presence in Israel, and they did try to establish a Jewish state in Palestine around like the birth of Christ and everything. But it's extremely important to understand that what happened with the actual history, and not let your religious brain kind of tell you historiography or whatever, like just tell you nonsense.
And speaking of a religious brain, like the Bible and the Torah tells you that you cannot loan out money and ask for interest. So what's going on?
Right.
What are we doing here with capitalism?
This is where I'm trying
this goes against everything that they think that they, want to put forward.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
It's important to understand the religious influence over the development of secular law, because for the longest time it was not like the legal institutions were not trying to be secular. They were trying to establish a religious like legal interpretation and impose it on everyone. And over time, like that, what religion that should be associated with the law changed, because it used to be like the Old Testament or whatever, Judaism should be the legal expert or whatever. And then the Christians started to be, no, we're the real legal experts. And then now we got the Muslims have their Sharia law. And they all argue about what the law actually is, where the word of God, right? So it's, and then the atheists want to have our say and say, hey, you guys can't go around acting like you get to tell us like what to do because you believe in something I don't. So now we have a big, actually, we feel like the law is more developed than it is, whatever. That's where I'm thinking.
And the Baha'is and the Sikhs and this and that, like,
because like the law is really not that old if you think about it. Like they only just established an international court and a UN system like this only a couple hundred years ago, like 100, less than 200 years ago, right? Like,
yeah.
So
if we could just leave religion out of it and just be like, okay, I'm a person, like Confucianism. Do unto me that I want you, like, I will do unto you that I want you to do unto me.
Yeah.
Like, how? That's so fucking simple.
Yeah. Well, legalism kind of comes from China. Like the concept of the law, I feel like the original people who whatever invented law as a concept, I'm pretty sure it comes from China, but I had to fact check myself there. So,
So I want to take one moment to say, please like, share, and subscribe. And I want to take another moment to say, um, we had all these issues. I thought that StreamYard was done for the day, so I went to run errands, and you had texted me and said StreamYard is back up, and I was like, oh well, I'm already out running errands, and you did it alone, and I just want to say thank you because I appreciate you. Like,
no worries.
yeah, I appreciate you. That's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. I knew I had a lot to talk about, so I was like, it sucks doing it by myself, but like, I know I can kind of maybe try and cover some more articles because you often have videos and stuff. So it's like I got to slog through some reading. Maybe I can try and do that. There was like some stuff that I didn't get to. I wanted to try and talk about Andrew Carnegie and stuff because he apparently was the one who funded the Peace Palace, they call it. But then I found a little article talking about how him and another American diplomat, Andrew Dixon White or whatever, they were calling the Peace Palace a temple of peace where the doors are open in contrast to the Janus temple in times of peace and closed in cases of war. And then you learn about the Israeli temple, the second temple that was destroyed when the Romans invaded Israel and enslaved the Jews and brought them back to Rome and stuff. And that temple was where the Jews did their sacrifices and stuff. And then with the birth of Christ or whatever, the animal sacrifices stopped. And all this stuff kind of happens at the same time. So it's a little bit like when you understand the Kabbalistic, whatever, Bohemian Grove stuff, how they do sacrifices. When they're calling their peace palace of the Hague Peace Conference, whatever, temple, makes me start to think, well, is that where you sacrifice people, whatever, with your agreements, right? Or am I just being a conspiracy theorist with that? Because I
Well,
don't like
I can't really speak that much on it because I was supposed to come on here and listen to what you had to say and react to it, but I wasn't here to hear it. So
no, but I
I'm
came
gonna
across
shut
some
my mouth.
I came across some really interesting things that I got to learn more about just in this like research. Because I also learned about somebody called, was it Baruch or whatever? Where's this article? Sorry. No, 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 no. Just because, like the Zionist Nazi connection, I found a guy who was instrumental in the American administration. Where the fuck is it now? I hate when I'm talking like this and looking for something. I'll find it. Don't worry. You go ahead and say something.
Just so you guys know in the chat, I have no way of looking at your comments. Like I'm surprised I'm actually on here, but the comment section is frozen for me. So I don't know what to do. Okay. I'm just chilling.
Just people like this are way too much of a coincidence or whatever. When like this is wild that history is like this. That these people were given so much power. So this Bernard Baruch was an American financier and statesman, amassed a fortune on the New York Stock Exchange, impressed Woodrow Wilson, managed nation's economic mobilization in World War I, advised Wilson during the Paris Peace Conference, made another fortune in the post-war bull market, foresaw the Wall Street crash, which is another thing I wish I had been able to talk about better, but I'll just kind of briefly try and sum up. When Germany lost World War I, they had a huge war reparations debt that fucked them over. And because they had awful terms that they were supposed to pay their reparations or whatever, it led to World War II because it was a vicious deal that was imposed on them that they could never meet the terms of. And so they decided, fuck that, we're not paying you back. We're just going to build our army and try and kill you again. And that's what happened with World War II. So but the 1930s crash happens when the Germans are trying to pay off their war debt. Okay, this motherfucker foresees the Wall Street crash. Okay, so I'm telling you, we got to revisit the Great Depression. I'm pretty sure that they triggered that on purpose. Didn't need to happen so that they could intentionally force the Germans to be. They crashed the world market so that the Germans would go into hyperinflation, so they couldn't pay back shit. Okay, and you say, who the fuck is this guy? And then you find who's this guy, like in World War II.
You know what, Michael?
President Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, in late 1946, the United States representative to the National Atomic Energy Commission, and then he made a plan that the Soviets rejected. But who was he in early life? He was born in Camden, South Carolina, to a Jewish family. His parents were Bell and Simon Baruch, a physician, Confederate soldier, and a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Are you fucking kidding me? This guy who did all that had a Jewish mother and a Ku Klux Klan father. And so that's a history of the Ku Klux Klan we don't know about. That's like Christian Zionist Ku Klux Klan or whatever. And that's like the missing piece. So I'm like, what the fuck? Mine was blown when I learned about this guy.
I wish all this shit wasn't happening, because when you told me what you wanted to talk about, I was like, okay, I got a couple of things. And I can't remember his name because I have too much shit to think about to remember random names. But it was
life is I'm scared.
Oh, thank you. Black Lives says hi.
Hey y'all.
Hey y'all.
The Nazi Party, and they sponsored the rise of Israel, right? So what more do you need? So,
but it was like this dude, another dude, kind of like that, and I pulled him up, and I was like, "Who the fuck is this dude? And why don't we know about him?"
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring him up, but I can't.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to come back and talk some more about this kind of stuff because it's getting a little bit late. But
Yeah.
as you can see, there's plenty to talk about.
So I can't do anything. So I'm just having him here. So if you want to play something or whatever to go out with.
Yeah, I don't have any videos or nothing. Frozen. Yeah, I should have looked for some kind of video to play, but we'll just have to. We could just throw on the music. And
what I want to say is, I've been seeing independent media people flipping the script. Be vigilant. Be mindful. And be careful.
Yeah.
Because some of these people are trying to, if you listen to a song enough on the radio and you don't like the song, eventually you start liking the song because you hear it so much. That's what they're trying to do in your ear.
Yeah.
So they're doing that with, what's that company from the goddamn Nazis? Palantir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Be vigilant. Oh, I love you. Other than thank you, Michael, for holding it down.
No problem. Thank all of you in the chat for sticking with us. Good to see 11 of you still at the end of this. And what's up, Marlo World? Good to see you.
And you have to take us out, Michael. I can't do anything. Everything's frozen. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I see Lance. I noticed this too, Lance. People like James Corbett, Richie from Boston, Dan Dix, etc. have all been reinstated on YouTube. I'm not sure what to think about that yet. It's a little interesting, but I find James Corbett, his analysis interesting. Dan Dix is a little bit more of a right-wing Canadian who's kind of good on COVID, maybe. I'm not sure what else, but apart from that, it's interesting to see who they're letting back on when, because they're still going after Richard Medhurst, from what I remember. who else are they going after now? I'm trying to think. There's a whole host of like a whole bunch of people that they banned and stuff, and then we've all kind of forgotten that they're still fighting a legal battle, right? Asa Winstanley from the Electronic Intifada. So go check out the Electronic Intifada if you want to hear Palestinian.
Thank goodness we're too small. They don't care.
Yeah. Kind of. There's a part. It's not always the most proud reasons why people don't want to grow. Sometimes people don't want to grow because they don't want to get their head chopped off, right?
All right, I'll let you sign it off. You did all the work. Good job,
Okay.
Michael.
No problem. Yep. Thanks for being here, everyone. Wish I had thought of an announcement of some sort. Actually, I guess tentatively, I might be taking a little bit of inspiration from the Hardlands Media guys. There right now, they're suffering a legal battle. They're got 3 lawsuits going on, and they're trying to take them on anyways. So what they're asking for is some legal funding for crowdfunding, GoFundMe. I maybe could call that up real quick just to show it, but I'm trying to mention I am thinking about trying to do the same thing because I've been trying to do this class action lawsuit I was telling you guys about against my landlords, and I've run into the sticky problem of the lawyers will not do it unless they get paid first. So if we want to try and carry forward our class action lawsuit, I'm going to have to set up another GoFundMe besides my personal Ko-fi account, and this one will have to be about strictly crowdfunding for the class action lawsuit. I've been talking about it with my neighbors. I have to go and get the consent from them all over again for this change of plan, but I've gotten a lot of them have given me the green light that we can go forward with this. So if some people drop out, we might still be able to go forward. So you guys let me know if you guys be willing to support, like Sean's saying, yes, support them if you can. I appreciate that. I know I've gotten a bit of assistance from Sean, and I don't want you to be the only one sending some money. So please, some the rest of you, if I get that set up, I would appreciate it. You could help us do that, because that's not just for me. None of us in this building deserve to be treated this way, and class action lawsuits seem to be an excellent tool to fight this kind of bullshit. I don't understand why we're not having more progress in that. I mean, I do understand why, but we have to try and utilize whatever tools we have available. So I will get back to you guys on that. See if I'll have that set up for you next week, but would appreciate your support. So have a good night, and see you guys next time. Have a good weekend. Thanks for hanging out.